Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fund Vermont's Future. Join the fight for public education. Tonight, we're gathered here to have a discussion, and I'd like to just start out with some housekeeping for our participants. I would like to remind you that each panelist will speak and then we will have a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions for our panelists, please direct them to the Q&A box and we will have a volunteer sorting through the questions. So we're going to actually pause for a second and we'll be right back. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our event this evening. We are just pausing for a few seconds, giving people a chance to come in as they're moving from the waiting room into the event. And so we just wanted to give it a few extra seconds to a minute to get some people in. So I'm going to start over. So welcome to our event tonight, Fund Vermont's Future, Join the Fight for Public Education. And I'm going to start out with some. Could people mute themselves? Thank you. All right. So we're going to start out with some basic housekeeping. So I'd like to remind participants the Q&A at the end. So please direct your questions to the Q&A box and we will have volunteers monitoring those questions and sorting them and sending them to me to ask our panelists after they each have given their presentation. Our chat box has been disabled to allow questions to go there so that we can post relevant information there. So keep an eye on the chat box for links and information that will be popping up throughout the event. So we're about ready to begin. And so to begin, I'm just going to say a little bit about the reason why we're having this event and also who I am. I'm Representative Brian Chena. I'm a member of the Champlain Valley DSA. I'm a clinical social worker. I have a private practice here in Burlington, Vermont, and I'm also a crisis clinician at the Howard Center, part of the union AFSCME Local 1674. I'm also a community organizer and an activist and a performance artist. And it's such pleasure working with the local activists and organizers at the Champlain Valley DSA and with our statewide DSA, as well as our national DSA, on really important work. It's been especially nice working with our labor unions and tying into the labor movement times. Topic, Vermont's future of a healthy democratic society. By providing an equitable and accessible education to all members of our society, we open the doors to opportunity and we invest in our common good. Our education system is only as good as its weakest link. So we need to make sure that every single piece of our system is strong, from pre-K to postgraduate, from technical education to STEM to the arts and beyond. The foundation of our education system is our education workforce, whose labor cultivates a population living to their fullest potential. We must adequately support our education workforce, and we must fully fund public education programs and infrastructure. The current COVID pandemic has increased the cries of scarcity and austerity, yet we live in a time where there are still abundant amounts of wealth that continue to be concentrated in the bank accounts and hands of the wealthiest people on our planet. We must challenge the myth that there aren't enough resources available to take care of every single person. The pandemic has exacerbated the existing flaws in our unsustainable economic system, and working people are once again asked to bear the cost and to make sacrifices in order to maintain the status quo for the most privileged. And once again, public education is threatened, despite being a vital piece of the social safety net. We recently stopped the closing of 3 state schools by direct action of students, faculty, staff, and the community. However, the next phase of the struggle now begins, as the community is asked to consider a new direction for public education. This moment is an opportunity for us. What kind of public education do we really want? How do we increase access to public education? Should public education be considered a right? In order to protect our public education system, we must come together to organize, and we must fight to fund our future. Our first panelist this evening is going to be Ellen David Friedman. Ellen David Friedman spent nearly 50 years working as a labor and community organizer in Vermont, only recently relocating to New York to help raise grandchildren. She was a union organizer for United Electrical Workers, American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, and for 20 years with the Vermont NEA. Presently, she serves as the chair of the board of Labor Notes, a 40-year-old media and education project that devotes itself to strengthening union silence.
Good evening, everyone. Happy to be here. I want to start by offering congratulations to the unionized faculty, the unionized staff, the students, and the family members of students and community members in our Vermont State's college communities for the tremendous spontaneous outpouring of solidarity in response to the totally ill-considered proposal to close the majority of the Vermont State colleges, and for achieving a victory. Victories at this moment in time are rare and incredibly precious. They're precious both because of what you win, because of how they inspire others, but also because they remind us of the principle, the basic edict that we use in labor notes a lot, which is when we fight, we win. What that means is we don't win every single fight. We never achieve everything we're looking for. But if we don't fight, we will never achieve any of it. What are we fighting against? What has this fight looked like over the last 10 years around the protection of public education? And where are we at this moment is going to be how I'm going to sort of shape the few minutes that I have to speak to you today. So what has the fight looked like over the last 10 years? About 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the last time that the world capitalist system took a big stumble, which was 2008, plunged us into a period of time in which many people, for the first time, paid attention to the fact that the economic principles of neoliberalism, which had been building since the 1970s, were now completely out of control. And what we mean by that is that changes in the tax code, changes in macroeconomic policy and microeconomic policy meant that really capital could just continue to concentrate and concentrate in fewer and fewer hands. And as it did so, the redistribution of social goods, which means things like healthcare, education, the protection of our land, the protection of workers, those things were being gradually but steadily strangled. So as of 2008, tremendous austerity cuts were made in the system of public education. And we have now had 12 years of increasing class size, of loss of basic and vital functions in education, including in public schools, librarians, social workers, nurses, ESL teachers, and in higher education, in public higher education, we have seen an incredible commercialization, pressures towards commodifying higher education so that the certain subjects, business subjects, the sciences and so on, which are producing things that can be sold for a profit, have been getting more resources than humanities, social sciences, those things that help us become critical thinkers and good citizens. And this has been a very steady and deliberate process. We have also seen in higher education that the development of our campuses, based on their amenities, based on their physical appearance, their ability to attract students and to charge higher tuition for things like, snack bars and beautiful student lounges and swimming pools and so on, were done at the expense of investing in faculty. So that one of the things that has happened has, of course, been the transfer of most of the teaching that goes on in education now from the hands of full-time tenured faculty into the hands of adjuncts who are very, very precarious. Anyway, this has not been random. It has been systematic. It's been going on everywhere from pre-K through higher education. At the same time, this wasn't sufficient, because the people who want to see a choking off of public good in order to privatize these things and make a profit out of them, they knew that they had something very important standing in their way that was going to interfere with their plans. And that was the fact that education workers in this country are the most densely unionized sector we have. In public education, it's 100%. In public higher education, it's virtually 100%. That is not true of any other profession. It's not true of any other sector. Well, the US Postal Service, which of course they have also been going after. But why are unions important? It's not only because they didn't want to pay people decent salaries and livable wages and invest in their pensions and make sure they have health insurance. It was because unions and education unions at their best are politically vital, they're powerful, and they will fight to defend not only their own salaries, not only their own living conditions, but they will fight to defend the public good that public education represents. And so over this last, specifically this last 10-year period, there has been a tremendous assault on public education unions. I just want to quickly highlight how we have been fighting back. Beginning in about 2012 or 13, some people will remember that the Chicago Teachers Union came under progressive leadership. It came under the leadership of socialists, as fortunately many other teachers unions now are becoming. And as a result of that, for the first time in about 30 years, that massive union, the third largest teachers union in the country, was able to bring out its members on strike. This was followed, as people will know, by a massive, very important strike by the Los Angeles Teachers Union, the second largest teachers union in the country, with demands that were demands for the social good. So they were demands against institutional racism. They were against gentrification. They were in support of a public healthcare system. And they were in support of the defense of public education. And then starting in 2018, we had these incredible strike wave, unexpected strike waves in the red states: West Virginia, Kentucky, Colorado, Arizona, Oklahoma, Virginia, and more since then. And those also have been strikes against austerity in states where the labor laws are very weak, where strikes are completely illegal. But teachers took those strikes anyway. In 2018 and 2019, there were more than 500,000 teachers in this country out on illegal strikes. What this shows us, the fight that is coming, the fight that has already begun, and the fight which you have now joined because of this tremendous spontaneous uprising in defense of the Vermont State Colleges, is a fight that is not only not going to end, it is going to become way deeper and way more important as we recover from this pandemic. People are destabilized by the pandemic. It's going to take a while for all of us to get our feet on the ground and see where and how we can fight, but we're no longer confused about why we need to fight. We need to fight because we won't survive otherwise. Thanks so much again for your tremendous work. I look forward to hearing from my fellow panelists.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ellen, for joining us. And before we move on to our next panelist, I would just like to bring to people's attention that the Champlain Valley DSA is asking that those who are interested in engaging in this work fill out a Google form with your contact information. And we will now be dropping a link to this form in the chat. It looks like it's there right now. So please feel free to submit a form if you're interested in joining in on this work with us. So now we're going to move on to our next guests who are going to speak as a team. The first member of this team is Linda Olson. She's the president of Vermont State College's Faculty Federation, AFT. She's a Linda Olson is a professor of sociology and women and gender studies at Castleton University. She's the president of the VSC Faculty Federation and the vice president of higher education for AFT Vermont. And her teammate is Kate Gold. Kate Gold is the president of the VSC United Professionals AFT Vermont. Kate graduated from Dartmouth College in 1998 with me. We're both Dartmouth 98 grads. And Kate, after sampling a few Western states, decided to move to Vermont with her husband in 2005. They both have worked at Linden State, NVU Linden since then, and have been raising their two children in Orleans County. So thank you, Linda and Kate.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I really appreciate it. I wanted to give you a little bit background information first about defining the problem that we're facing in the Vermont State Colleges. We currently rank 49th out of 50 for state support for public higher education. That means most of our revenue comes from tuition. This means our students pay one of the highest tuitions in the country, and they graduate with more student loan debt. Due to the lack of state support, our students have no affordable option anymore in Vermont. In fact, 40% of our students don't go on to any post-secondary education at all. This is true despite the fact that we have one of the highest high school graduation rates in the country. So there's a definite disconnect there. This lack of state support was not always the case. There's been a consistent disinvestment in public higher education in Vermont since 1980. In 1980, state appropriations covered 49% of the VSC budget. Now it covers 17.5%. This is appalling. This lack of funding has made us precarious at the best of times, but has really destroyed us at the time of COVID. The enacting legislation that created the VSC in 1961 promised to support the VSC in whole or substantial part. It's time for legislators to live up to that promise. For the past several years, the VSC has also lost its way. The mission of the VSC is for the benefit of Vermont. The Vermont State College system provides affordable, high quality, student-centered, and accessible education. Instead, the focus of the Board of Trustees and the Chancellor's office has been to try to find ways to reduce the costs of the VSC by attempting to emulate institutions like Southern New Hampshire University, which is a private university whose online program is little more than a diploma mill. I think we can do better. It's time we get back to our public mission for the betterment of Vermont. And actually, we have the ear of the legislature now in ways that we haven't in my 25 years teaching at Castleton. So I think it's time we capitalize on that. In terms of redefining the VSC, we need to reevaluate which aspects of our college serve our public missions and which do not. First and foremost, we need to close down the Chancellor's office and absorb the work done there on our campuses. We currently spend $8.1 million on the Chancellor's office annually. That's more than a quarter of our total state appropriation. We can do better. We need to make the VSC central to the recovery of COVID-19. The decisions we make now, as large amounts of federal money are coming into Vermont, will make all the difference for our students, for our state colleges, for our university, and for our local economies. We must commit to all three and invest money now while it's available, and we can make a huge difference for all Vermonters. Legislators must also acknowledge the value of the VSC to the state, and by giving us resources to stay open next year in terms of bridge funding, while we figure out a path forward, but also to make a commitment to support us in the future. This is absolutely vital to our state and also to a democracy. The most important thing we can do, though, is to stay unified. Pitting the VSC against UVM or the K through 12 would not benefit us. Pitting the VSC schools against each other will destroy us. Our way forward is through solidarity, and we must work together to solve this. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. And I'll pick it up from there. You laid out the circumstances that got us to this point pretty well. And I just want to make a few other points that prior to COVID, many of the schools, and I know NVU the best because that's where I've been involved the longest, we were on the way to sustainability before this hit, but our sustainability really rested on student enrollment and our continued improvements we've made to our curriculum, and that's updating and expanding effective programs. We're looking at phasing out programs that just aren't as relevant or as well enrolled, and really looking at how our delivery methods and how can we adapt those to reach the widest audience and serve the Vermonters and the other students who would really benefit from the programs that we offer, and how do we market those going forward. And we've had some hiccups there for sure, but we really were on the path to making that work, which is a testament to the skill and energy and just work ethic of everybody who's been involved with that process. It's just been incredible. And I hear people push back about stagnant institutions and outdated ways of doing things, but that hasn't been my experience with the VSC at all. Since I've been there, we've been in a constant state of improvement and reinvention. And the NVU as a whole has been working to better efficiency as fast as our accreditation boards will allow. So I think that's the other thing that people don't necessarily understand instinctively about higher education is that we have a lot of people certifying the product that we are putting out in our programs and our faculty and everything else. And so certain things are the way they are because that's the way they're mandated to be. So we have to be very careful that we aren't, throwing the baby out with the bathwater there as we go forward. So it has to be careful, and it has to be people who really understand higher education helping make those decisions. So here we are post-COVID, and all the rules are thrown out the window. Enrollment is not following past patterns at all, and it's very hard to predict where that's going to land, what decisions students are going to make. And the national consensus is that it's going to be lower. So we're really pleased that the state committed to buying us time with increased support so that we can gather more information and really pivot with these new realities, because we do realize that we're going to have to adjust to what Vermont and what students in this country need. And this new reality has to absolutely include these northern campuses of the Vermont State College system. And I think based on the public response in the last few weeks, many Vermonters agree with us. In fact, I think we have quite the public upswell at this point of people understanding that these colleges mean a lot to them and they need to express that. And I'm totally heartened, excited to see that because I've known for a long time how important they are. So it's good to see others chiming in on that. So in these last few weeks, we have seen what happens when a very isolated few sit in the virtual closed door meetings and make these huge decisions without any broad input. And I believe the board meant well, but they've been fighting the same battle. And I think they lost sight of our core mission. And I think they threw in the towel instead of opening their doors and making a better choice there. So education, and particularly higher education, I think is the greatest force multiplier we have for individual, social, and economic growth. We saw this after World War II with the GI Bill that sent thousands of veterans to colleges across the country and really helped contribute to the rise of the middle class. So investing in educational opportunities for current and future Vermonters, instead of continuing to eliminate opportunities in time of crisis, makes sense. Like nothing else makes sense. The dollars we spend on our state colleges return to the communities and the state via food and retail spending, real estate, utilities, property taxes, all of those things. And the dollars spent on higher education are an investment in the young people and families that we say we want to attract and keep. So it's an investment for Vermont's need for teachers and counselors and business owners and nurses and technicians and all kinds of other educated professionals who come and stay and help us grow Vermont into a place that we all want to live. So are we going to need to change and adapt to meet these post-COVID realities with the needs and resources? Yes, absolutely. And will we need the state support to do that? Definitely, yes, we will. But it's absolutely essential to the health and growth and survival of the state. So we are working with various other union organizers, some of whom are on here, and reaching out to others not directly involved with the Vermont State College system to help provide broader perspectives to our legislators. We're working with various community groups who have formed to develop solutions, and we're working with our campus leadership on the same. Our mission is to serve and present, to serve the present and future students of Vermont, and we'll continue to do everything we can to stay true to that mission.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you both, Linda and Kate, for joining us and bringing your perspective to the panel this evening. Next up, we have Ben Luce. Ben Luce is a professor at NVU and administrator of the Facebook page VSCS Thrive. Ben is a professor of physics at Northern Vermont University, where he has taught for 12 years. He's also the founder of the Facebook group VSCS Thrive, formerly known as Protest Vermont State Permanent Closures, and is a lead organizer of a new organization associated with this group named VSCS Thrive, which can be found at www.vscsthrive.org. Thanks for joining us, Ben.
Thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here. So I must say, Kate and Linda covered some of the things that I was definitely wanted to say, and I would like to start off by maybe amplifying a few of those things from my own point of view. And I want to say kudos to Linda. She's been a fighter for us for many years. And for a while, when I was directly involved in the union as a chapter chair, I got to see up close what she was going through, trying to deal with the administration, and the way that the union was treated was beyond the pale, I think. And people need to realize there's been a really toxic environment there, that in a situation that really needs to be addressed. I hope that going forward, we will eventually have a much more professional and respectful administration in place when it comes to dealing with things like contract negotiations and funding and other things like that. In addition to this, I would like to start off with thinking what Linda said about the funding level. Just to give you a fact, based on the information from the Pew Charitable Trust, the ratio of tuition in 2017 in the VSCS system was the ratio of tuition to state funding was 5.6. That's an enormous number because the national average is actually under 1. So people need to realize we've been well at this meager 17% level when you consider how we compare with other states in terms of tuition rates and other things like that. And that leads me to another point that Kate was touching on. As we move forward, whatever kinds of reforms happen need to be done by people who really truly care for our system and really truly know what they're doing. My greatest fear going forward is that the agenda that the former chancellor had, which was to shut us down, to shut down NVU and VTC Randolph, I believe that intent is still there. That proposal didn't come out of a vacuum. It came out of a long-standing reluctance of the legislature to prioritize higher education, especially within the state colleges, and especially in rural Vermont. And I believe that reluctance to increase the funding allocation is still as strong as ever. We've already seen it in the public statements by pretty much most of the leadership that has weighed in on the issue. And so the reaction of the leadership was not to turn around after this became a genuine public issue, was not to turn around and say, okay, we need to fix this problem and fund you guys properly. It was, oh, well, we're going to study you. We're going to hire an external entity and study you and then maybe reform you. So my biggest fear is that all the proactive efforts that are going into figuring out ideas for how we can improve the system are simply going to become co-opted and cherry-picked for ideas that don't get in the way of actually not increasing the funding, and that what we'll wind up with is really dramatic downsizing, possibly even the elimination of some campuses, simply because they really don't want to increase the funding. And so we'll be back to the same place we were, and the chancellor's original agenda will actually get carried out. So I'm very, very wary of that. That's not to say that there aren't a lot of things we can do to improve, but we, as also Kate pointed out, we were also doing that, and we've been doing that for years, and we're very capable of doing that. It's not like we have a big problem. Now, on the topic of justifications for downsizing, the justification of the chancellor in his white paper was largely due to falling enrollment, which he blamed largely on demographics. But I would like to point out that that entire period of enrollment decline exactly coincides with this extreme period of austerity when the state colleges were only funded at about 17%. That means we didn't have the money, basically, to keep our tuition rates competitive. We didn't have the funds for proper advertising. We didn't have the funds to keep our facilities in good shape. We didn't have the funds to necessarily develop our programs properly. And so I think it's amazing we've actually done as well as we have, given that. And I actually blame the bulk of that enrollment decline, not on demographics, but on basically being starved to death. Case in point, Castleton's done fairly well recently, and they had some infusion of cash that was actually taken away from NVU. So, and also these are small colleges. If you apply the law of large numbers, you cannot say that a small entity like the Vermont State Colleges necessarily has to follow the demographic trends. If we're properly supported and we innovate properly and we take advantage of these wonderful facilities and the place that we're in Vermont and the attractiveness in Vermont, we can potentially buck that trend. But we're only going to be able to do it if we have a reasonable base level of state funding. So it's really, really critical that happens. And that is my top priority right now. And we have a pledge campaign on VCS Thrive to get legislators to pledge to fighting for restoring a proper level of funding, at least double what our current allocation is. And we're seeking to get those pledges of support by July 1st so that we can restore some confidence in the system. Kate also mentioned this idea about confidence in the system, and I think this is a critical point. We've been severely damaged. The reputation of the schools, especially with their respect to their stability, has been severely damaged on top of having the COVID crisis. The legislature needs to step up now and recognize that this is not really the time to try to totally redesign us. This is really the time that they need to step in and fix the damage. The chancellor actually squandered a fantastic opportunity potentially to really get together with us over the last year and figure out how to fix these problems. Instead, he created enormous damage, and that needs to be fixed. One of the suggestions that's been put forth, which I think has a lot of merit, is to fund incoming students, first-year students, with free tuition for a semester as an enticement to get them to sign on board. And if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense for students that might be worried about the financial future, because that goes right to the heart of the financial question and also goes to the heart of maybe helping them get into college at a time when their families probably suffering income problems and other things due to the COVID crisis. the last thing I want to say is about the way that this needs to happen. The faculty and staff unions of our state colleges are not allowed to strike. And this is a fundamental weakness that we have. We just don't have a lot of leverage directly the way that many unions do. And it's hard enough even for unions that can strike for them to really bring about change sometimes. So we're in a particularly weak position. And I believe that the only way that we can really achieve what we really need to do here is to build a strong, unified public movement that is really quite activist about getting the funding and that is not going to take no for an answer, our shelf from what's going on. But we do have an opportunity here. We have a lot of community support right now that has come out of the woodwork that has not been very vocal before. We have a lot of students really activated and educated on the issue. And we have faculty and students. So I think we really need to get on board with that. And I would particularly speak to the faculty and staff that are listening to this to really step up to the plate. I think faculty have been shy about doing this in the past because we don't want to be viewed as out there thumping for our own paycheck. It's a kind of a overly humble sort of point of view. And I think the time for that is over because we must stand up for this by standing up not only for our own union and our own salaries and benefits, we are also standing up for the funding that keeps our tuition rates low and that keeps our students from being saddled with enormous debt burden and that helps our communities. So we really need to get this together. We've got to keep the momentum going and we've got to bring about a big change in Montpelier.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
So next up, we have Helen Scott. Helen is a professor of English at the University of Vermont and a member of the faculty union, United Academics, AFT, AAUP. She has held various roles in the union. Sorry about that. There was a glitch on my end here. I don't know if you saw it. Helen has held various roles in the union. Including, and she's currently a representative of the English department. She also serves as district vice president for Chittenden County with the Vermont AFL-CIO. Thank you for joining us, Helen.
Thank you for having me. And it's just so exciting to be here with all of these other educators who are engaged in struggle. And it makes me really feel part of a broader network, a broader labor network. And I hope that we can deepen those relationships of solidarity coming out of this event. So thank you for hosting this. So at the University of Vermont, after really endless messages thanking us for our hard work and dedication during these challenging times, our administration just announced swinging budget cut plans that show nothing but callous disrespect for faculty. The cuts are being billed as reasonable shared sacrifice in face of the crisis. As my dean said, these measures will impact nearly every member of our community in some way, but nothing about this plan is fair or equitable or reasonable. Like the worst of regressive taxation, it protects the university's wealth while imposing undue hardship on those who earn the least. It would, I keep using the conditional tense because they haven't happened yet, we're still resisting. They would inflict great harm on the educational quality because they target faculty who are award-winning, experienced, much beloved faculty who teach multiple sections of courses that are essential to our students. So for example, in my department, English, we're looking to lose more than 20 course sections next year if these go through. And even on their terms, it makes no sense. It makes no financial sense because the people that they're cutting earn so little that relatively little money will be saved. It's very clear that the impact of the cuts will not be evenly felt. Our dean and some top administrators are taking an 8.3% reduction in salary. This follows the earlier announcement that the university president would forego his pay in the month of April. So President Garamella's generous sacrifice would leave him with a humble $440,000 salary. My dean's voluntary reduction would take his salary to around $250,000. At the same time, all non-tenure track faculty, and these are typically lecturers who teach 4 courses a semester, are slated for an involuntary reduction in their workload to 75%. Now, I want to take a moment to read from yesterday's Burlington Free Press, which quotes President Garamella. "The university has not imposed any pay cuts on any faculty," he said, explaining this is the time of year when each college assigns workload based on anticipated need. "It's a question of change in FTE, full-time equivalency, which is, the amount of time they teach. It's their workload and it's not a pay cut." The Free Press adds, however, he acknowledged will correlate with less pay cut. And this will bring average lecturer's salary in College of Sciences down to below $43,000. So after this shared sacrifice, lecturers will be below livable wage. And I've heard from many who talk about going into a position of food and shelter insecurity, they and their children. There are a lot of single mothers who are impacted by this, while the president will be making more than 10 times their salary and the dean more than 5 times. At the same time as this is happening to the lecturers, the budget plan imposes a hiring freeze on staff and part-time faculty. And my focus has to be on teaching here, but if I had more time, I would say a lot more about the staff who are also in a precarious situation. But part-time professors are a vital part of the university. They essentially teach, they routinely teach essential courses for little compensation. They keep programs running. They ensure continuity for students. Part-timers report being paid over the summer, for example, $5,700 per course without benefits, contingent on enrollment. And so the savings here are paltry. One of my colleagues wrote on our union discussion list, if you think of the budget as a container of large boulders, they are frantically picking out the pieces of gravel. The Rutgers University faculty came up with the perfect name for this approach to budget uncertainty. They call it maximum pain for minimum gain. Now, while the cuts definitely hit the non-tenure track and part-timers the hardest, they're also bad for all faculty. First, because they assume that tenure track faculty will take up the slack and work more for less after we've been squeezed for decades. Second, because they'll have a devastating impact on the university as a whole. For example, the administration plans to take away, they have taken away course releases and stipends for faculty who run particular programs. Those programs, you'll be surprised to hear, include Jewish studies, critical race and ethnic studies, and sexuality, gender, and women's studies. So much for the university's commitment to equity and diversity. And third, because more cuts are coming. This can be seen in other universities such as Ohio State. A faculty member there said, "We are canaries in a very toxic mine. Many other schools are probably going to go through this." So if we accept the logic of these cuts now, it will be much harder for us to stave off worse attacks in the future. I want to be clear that although the pandemic is the catalyst for these measures, they are part of a far longer pattern that Ellen talked about earlier. And in that way, there's something of a wish list for our administration, in fact. The faculty union, United Academics, has been documenting for decades consistent underfunding of education, and along with it, squeezing of faculty at all levels in favor of administrative bloat, marketing and branding, expensive amenities, and any number of boondoggle initiatives that come and go. So their budgetary crises are really a question of misplaced priorities. And that continues to be the case, even in the context of this genuine crisis for higher education. In this sense, the University of Vermont is a microcosm of the broader capitalist system. The staff and faculty who do the most struggle to make ends meet, while board members and the president and a phalanx of vice presidents, and nobody even really knows what they do, are raking in six-figure salaries. The university has an endowment of more than 467 million, and yet they're eliminating part-time faculty who make less than $6,000 a course. As a petition against the cuts launched by some students puts it, the university apparently has enough money to pay millions in branding and consultants, but no money for its students or faculty. The logic of austerity and the logic here is that there is not enough to go round, so we're forced to compete with each other for the crumbs rather than demanding more access to the wealth that is there. And as Linda said, this logic constantly pits us one against each other, non-tenure track versus tenure track, part-time versus full-time, and on a broader level, K through 12 education versus the state colleges versus the University of Vermont. We have everything to gain by standing in solidarity with each other to defend public education at all levels. So for all of these reasons and more, as Dana just noted in the chat, at the University of Vermont, we've just launched a public campaign against the cuts. We were indeed inspired by faculty, staff, students, the unions at the Vermont state colleges. And like them, we are saying we refuse to accept that there is no alternative. We had our first meeting yesterday, 55 people. We're planning a protest to Code of Trustees meeting. But if we fight back, we might win.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Helen. So next up, we have Tevia Kelman. Tev is a high school history teacher, a member of the Vermont NEA's Healthcare Council, and a member of the Vermont Workers Center statewide base building committee. Thank you for joining us, Tev.
Thank just a little bit about systems and also the threat, including VC, is very personal. And you know, one of is hey, I'm sorry about that. I'm hoping, can folks hear me? Brian, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
All right. Sorry about that. I was just saying, you know, one thing that I just want to say off the bat is one of the things that most struck me when the news came down about the threat of closing down the colleges was seeing how it activated the community that I teach in, Randolph, really across a lot of potential lines of division, because I think that in a small rural town, and I'm sure that folks in Johnson would echo this, the economic and the cultural role of a college campus is huge, and as well as the ways in which the high school where I teach and the tech center, which is in the same building, and tech center are really mutually self-reliant. And I think that the incredible, overwhelming support for the movement to fight back, I think, speaks to that. I was just really struck by being at the rally in Montpelier on the Monday after that decision came down, and I think it might have been the first time that I saw a car, probably like a Prius or something, waving the Palestinian flag, and then a big mud truck waving the American flag, just a huge American flag in the same rally on the same side. And so I think that, to me, really speaks to what I think several other panelists have alluded to, which is the need to build solidarity that really cuts across narrower ways of defining the different kind of interest groups, right? So I think interest groups is sort of like a neoliberal idea, this idea that each group of workers or consumers or taxpayers has its own agenda that's apart from everybody else's. And I think that austerity and the rest of the neoliberal agenda really rests on people buying into that and believing that. So yeah, I mean, I think to echo what a lot of others have said, clearly what needs to happen is to build a mass movement that includes educators at every level. I think it needs to also include ununionized workers in the education system. I'm thinking most especially of folks doing childcare, before the pre-K system. I think that it needs to elevate, it needs to be an alliance of professional or tenured faculty. I guess in my shop, it's professional staff and support staff, or ESPs. It's not, I think at the higher ed level, it has to do with, tenured faculty and adjuncts down to folks working in maintenance, and students, right? And so I think that we're in the early stages of figuring out how to build a movement that represents all of those constituencies, not as interest groups, but as a class, which is differently hurt, but collectively hurt by these kinds of cuts to our public institutions. So I will say from where I'm sitting in Vermont NEA, I think we have a lot of work to do to build that kind of consciousness among our members. I think that there's a great deal of incentive, I think, built into the profession of teaching that encourages us to see ourselves as apart from the working class, right? We're professionals, we're not workers. I think that ideology is really baked into many aspects of sort of the way that we are trained to understand our jobs and our role. And certainly a part of that is to depoliticize ourselves. This is something that I think, particularly in the Trump era, potential organizing, and as Ellen was referring to, like really realizing the power that we have in the education sector. So I don't think I have time, nor do I feel like this is really the forum to get into a really detailed how-to, but I do want to share just a couple thoughts of what a sort of informal rank and file group within Vermont NEA is trying to do to build this kind of consciousness at a broad level among our members, as well as to really, mobilize to both go on defense when it's needed, right? When we see these kinds of savage cuts, like the attempts to close down the school, rather the 3 campuses, but also to go on offense, because I think that one thing that's really clear in this time to me is that the system, neoliberal capitalism is having a hell of a time keeping the lid on all of the promises it's made and all of the ways that it is sort of smoothed over really brutal inequalities, the way it's disinvested from things like education, or, a just climate transition that are becoming so clearly so crucial. And so I think that we have an opportunity to really go on offense in this moment of weakness and try to win concessions, which once we have them are not going to so easily be given up. And I think that that's another lesson of the fight over the state colleges, right? I really think that there was a level where they thought that they could come after these state colleges and people would feel like, yeah, it's a bunch of overpaid professors. But instead, they were met with people realizing what this would mean on an economic level and on a sort of social and cultural and emotional level in these communities. And I think they underestimated that. So I think we need to think about how to capitalize on those local fights. I suspect I'm probably out of time, Brian. Is that true?
You're right about there. Yep.
All right. Maybe I'll just close by saying, we are working on building a center of gravity within Vermont NEA that really understands the need for a fighting union, and one that is fighting for common good demands, and one that is fighting across local lines and across really lines of forming alliances with other unions and with non-unionized workers. And I think that I'm expecting big fights happening in the K-12 system as we talk about reopening schools and as we see what austerity looks like in the K-12 budgets. So just want to close with solidarity to all of the folks in higher ed who are fighting now. We're with you, and we know that you'll be with us when the time comes. Thank you.
Thank you, Tevye. So now we're gonna, as we sort of sort through our first round of questions, we're gonna take a moment to bring on Isaac Kreisman, the co-chair of Champlain Valley DSA, for a message for our viewers.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks for all the panelists. I'm just resharing in the chat here the link to the Google form that is just a way for us to connect with one another on that note that Tevye ended on of solidarity. And what we've seen throughout this panel, I think, is that the education system already is and will continue to be under attack, from the K-12 level to higher ed, from the state colleges to UVM, and that we really need to figure out ways to follow the lead that Ben and the group that organized the car protest in Montpelier took to stop the plans of the political elite in their tracks and demand that public education is a human right for everyone in Vermont. So in order to facilitate that, in order to continue organizing conversations and action planning, we wanted to put this out there just as a way for the people who participated in and put on this panel to get information about who's attending and figure out ways to connect after this. We'd like to call a meeting that would bring together people from different parts of the education fight across unions, across schools, and across workplaces. So if you haven't gotten a chance to fill out that form, please do so during the Q&A.
Hello, everyone. So, this is Brian. I hope people can hear me. I was actually dropped off for a minute, and I don't know what happened to the whole thing. It looks like, but I'm gonna jump back in where I left off. So I'm not sure who heard. Okay, it looks like several people were dropped. There was a catastrophic event that disrupted our event. Very symbolic of the times that we are in. So we'll give it just a minute for people to reorient themselves. Who knows what that was about? I think when these things happen, it's just more evidence why the state needs to also invest in a better broadband internet system for us as we move into the 21st century. So now that we are back, it looks like most of our panelists are back. We lost a few people, but we'll jump right in here. So I was giving you all a speech about how to engage in the in the discussion when everything fell apart. So I'm going to repeat what I said, assuming no one heard it. So it's time for our question and answer. The way it's going to work is I'm going to ask all of the panelists to turn your cameras on, but stay on mute so I can see you. And if you want to answer a question, you can raise your hand physically. You can raise your cyber hand. And if I don't see you, feel free to whip out a prop and get my attention however you need to. But we're going to roll with this and see how it goes. So the first question, which I was reading so eloquently when all of a sudden just everything stopped, was a question directed to everyone. And it's one of those questions that people ask that are like a treatise followed by a question. It's like a statement and then a question, which is good. We are facing enormous threats of austerity in our state on education at every level. We are going to have to organize and fight in different way. Lobbying and voting will get few results. We need to draw on the lessons of successful teachers and professors struggle throughout the country that have won. And here's the question.
I got it.
Wait, here's the question though. What are the most important lessons of the teacher strikes that have happened over the last 2 years for the struggle in Vermont? Ellen, you're first.
I think this question really is easy to answer. The most important lesson that we have learned is forget the law. Do not be guided by the law. Do not be limited by the law. I suspect that may be a shock to some of the people on this call, maybe some of the panelists. What I think, I've spent 50 years in the labor movement, and what I've come to understand now more clearly than I understood 50 years ago is that our labor laws were only won after 150 years of struggle under illegal conditions. People going on illegal strikes, organizing strikes, unions outside the law, making demands on their employers outside the law. And that the only reason we ended up with the National Labor Relations Act in 1935, and then ended up with laws for public sector workers, which had to be done state by state, beginning mostly after World War II in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, was because there was so goddamn much struggle. There were so many people making demands. And the people in charge, the politicians, said, whoa, we had better do something to get this under control. That's what the laws are. They look like laws to give us power. They are actually laws to limit our power. So I can tell you, I've been deeply involved with the teachers sector union movement for 30 or 40 years, and specifically with these strikes that have been going on in the last 10 years or so, and these last 2 years, these illegal strikes. You have to decide one thing only. What are the goals around which you and your coworkers can align? That's your only question. What is the demand that you can bring your coworkers together on? And then you just do whatever you need to do. You can do what you need to do. You need to stop traffic. You need to confront politicians. You need mostly to withhold your labor. And when you do that, you win. That's the answer.
Thank you, Ellen. Does anyone else want to add to that? Or should we go on to the next question? I'm looking, I don't see any sign. Oh, Tev, go Tev.
I appreciate and echo what Alan's saying. I think one other thing that I would add, just kind of my take, is that you also don't necessarily need a master plan, right? I mean, it seems like there are, like the UTLA strike, I think, was the product of a lot of intentional forward-thinking campaign building and caucus building and escalation over many, many years. But West Virginia, as far as I understand, was what happens when you have a cadre of leaders who know how to seize a moment of crisis. And I think seeing how that strike caught fire from some, local illegal, as Ellen was saying, work stoppages, very quickly spread out of the education sector, brought in, cops and firefighters who are not always strong allies of teachers, and really became about healthcare, right? And became like about taxing wealth, taxing, those who are exploiting the public sector, and providing, it didn't grow into a healthcare as a human right campaign per se, but it was certainly in that direction. So I think just I don't know. I think this is something we've been talking about in this kind of group of rank and filers of like how intimidating it is to see the enormity of what some of these strikes are capable of, and to recognize that that's what the moment calls for, and be like, I don't know how the hell to do that, and to recognize that neither did the people who did that like things grow out of the moment, out of, an analysis that leads you to make choices reacting to conditions that you can't necessarily predict.
Can I add one point to this? The 500,000 teachers that were out on illegal strikes in 2018 and 2019, no one was arrested, no one lost their job, no one lost their license, no one was blacklisted. Those are the things we're scared of. And the reason that happened is because it became a universal action. They were able to touch on that vein of indignation that people are feeling about their lives right now and say, there's only one path for us, and that's to unify. And when you unify, you're not going to be targeted. You can't be, because there will be millions of you.
Thank you. Ben would like to add.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question for us because, as I mentioned before, we're not allowed to strike, but it's also hard for us, even if we decided to go against the law, because they were trying to shut us down. And so they might very well say, okay, great, don't come back to work next month. That's what we wanted. So we're different from secondary level teaching, for example, because schools are, the public schools have to be there, right? So, well, let me finish. So I think there's still an agenda to actually shut down some of these campuses. If we walk off the job, I'm not sure we have the leverage. Where we may have some leverage, I think, is in the image of Vermont and the Vermont brand and the idea of keeping young people here, and the fact that I think that the legislature has ignored its own laws. I believe, and I may be wrong about this, but I believe that a court of law just might side with the class action lawsuit, saying you guys have underpaid you're underfunded your colleges $500 million in the last 20 years, or maybe $1 billion, and created huge debt burdens. Sorry, Vermont's going to have to cough up $1 billion in penalties to go back to compensate that and bring a real credible lawsuit. So that might be a leverage point. Now, I'd certainly like to hear what you have to say, because if you're correct, Ellen, and we could really do something, if we could, go a little beyond the law and push real civil disobedience and make a difference, I'd be the first one that would want to know.
Can I quickly respond to say there is a direct parallel, and K-12 public education is under dire threat from privatization and charter schools. So that in Los Angeles, that massively successful strike by the UTLA, the United Teachers of Los Angeles last year, was done in a city where nearly 50% of public school students are already in private charter schools. So they are facing exactly the same thing that you're facing. The threat is constantly there. We're going to defund you, and your customers, your students, are going to go elsewhere. So that's my first point. The second point is, please do not rely on any court of law requiring any public entity, any government entity, to repay their debts. I now live in New York State, and all I can tell you is that hundreds of millions of dollars are not being paid to urban school districts in New York City, and that the only solution is going to be privatization, charterization, and an end to public education, because they're going to say, we don't have the money. The only way they get the money is if we raise a political force powerful enough and inexorable enough that the entire formulation for getting money out of the billionaires and out of the corporations that has choked us for the last 30 or 40 years is reversed. And it will not be reversed by courts, certainly not the courts that have Trump appointees.
So let me ask you, in the case of those teachers, who are facing possible privatization, where is the real leverage left then? Is it left because there's still strong public support for the public schools, despite there being, and here we have some of that, right? We have our rural communities that don't want these colleges closed.
Yeah.
So, I suppose you could see a kind of an interesting dynamic there if we walked off the job and said, we're not going to do this. Sorry, there's a crisis. Maybe our communities would say, oh my God, we've got to get up there and fight with them too and make sure this happens. So, all right. So
let me tell you one other thing about this, because I really want to encourage you in this direction. And it's not only because I believe that strikes are the powerful weapon of workers, it's because of the facts. When I came into the labor movement, which was in the 1970s, there were a lot of teacher strikes, many illegal. And at that time, they were done against incredibly low public opinion. And parents and community members hated those strikes, and they did them anyway because teachers were so poorly paid at that time. All the polls now show since 2018 on, with all these illegal teacher strikes, they show upwards of 70 and 75% public support for those strikes, not just for teachers when they're behaving as public servants, but they support the strikes. And the reason is because the general public society understands that it's you who are standing on the front lines defending their future. Every adult knows, every adult, whether they're a parent or a grandparent or they're just seeing other children grow up, they know there's only one future for civilization, and that is if we guarantee public education. Thanks. And so they are defending us.
Nicely put.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. So on that note, we're going to shift focus and use the remaining few minutes to bring in a few voices who haven't answered questions yet. So the next question is going to be just for Helen, and then the next one's going to be for Kate and Linda. So Helen, can you speak to how the reduced workload is a sham because lecturers and also staff are being squeezed to do even more in the name of saving UVM and keeping students connected and engaged?
Yeah, so this is really asking how these cuts are bad for tenure track faculty, right?
I was just reading word for word what was sent to me. I think you can take that and run with it with your interpretation, and then we will learn immensely. So,
well, I mean, it's a pattern that's been going on for a long time, and it's part of the neoliberalization of the University of Vermont. That there's been a huge transfer of, used to be majority tenure track faculty, minority lecturer, non-tenure track, and that's totally reversed. So we have more and more faculty who are they're paid less, they work more, and then they don't have the status of tenure track faculty. And that looks like it's kind of a good deal for the tenure track faculty because they're getting paid more and they have more prestige and so forth. But what that's gone along with is a complete squeeze on tenured faculty including a whole bunch of work that used to be considered administrative that you would get you would get paid for and you would get course release for, that's now all considered service. So, there's just this huge increase in workload. Just to give you an example, I direct 2 programs and I used to get 2 course releases for them. No, actually, there are 3 things that I direct. They used to come along with 3 course releases. And now I do all 3 of them and I get 1 course release. So that's the level of just the increase. It's like the speed up on tenure track faculty that's gone along with the pressure to transform previously tenured positions into non-tenure track. So those 2 things go hand in hand, and it's part of the whole, project of driving down the conditions and increasing the work for everybody. And that's why the huge division between non-tenured and tenured is it's a huge point of weakness for us, in terms of organizing. And so this current, and the university is not stupid. Garamel has sounded pretty stupid in that quote, but they actually do have a plan, and it is a divide and conquer plan. So they're going after the weakest faculty, and then people start saying, oh my God, I've still got a job, oh, I'm so lucky. And then you agree to more and more. I've got colleagues who are voluntarily working for free over the summer because they want to prove that they're really valuable and that they will pull in more students to keep enrollments, and to re-enroll students. So I think that division is one of the most important ones for higher education that we have to tackle. And that means that tenured faculty have to stand up for, promote, advocate for the less protected faculty. I just got promoted to full professor. It means nothing when all of my colleagues, a whole bunch of my colleagues, are being given 25% pay cuts. And if you don't understand that, then you don't understand anything. So that's the first lesson of solidarity.
Thank you, Helen. So the next question is for Linda and Kate. And then if we have a few minutes, we have a final question for everyone. So Linda and Kate, could you speak to the rise in administrative positions and costs across the Vermont State College system while simultaneously decreasing faculty and/or instructional costs? Have we or could we possibly coordinate some sort of information sheet regarding this for the public as well as our elected officials?
Kate, you want me to take it or do you want to start?
You go ahead and start and I'll follow up
Okay.
with NVU information.
Okay. Well, I think as a system overall, if you look at IPEDS data, which is the data that's federally required or mandated for anyone who receives federal funds, we are way out of whack when it comes to administrative costs. That we have more administrators per FTE than we do faculty, and we are definitely out of whack. And I think that the fact that we spent more than a quarter of appropriations on a chancellor's office illustrates that. So I think that just is an incredible waste of our very, very limited resources. And the result has been over the past several years that the full-time faculty is down 27%. The staff is down 20%. I think the professional staff is at 25% too, if I'm not mistaken. Kate can surely speak to that. But there hasn't been the same reduction system-wide, I'm talking about, of administrators. So there is definitely a top-heavy administration in the VSC as a whole that I think needs to come. When we make cuts, we don't think about cutting administrators typically. We're much more likely to think about cutting the most vulnerable first: staff, part-time faculty, professional staff, and faculty. And untenured faculty, of course, are the most vulnerable. So I would agree with a lot of what Helen just said, that it focuses primarily on those who are most vulnerable in our institutions. Take it away, Kate.
Yes, and I would say, though, across the system has been top heavy, and I talked to folks at VTC and Castleton. about this because I hear it a lot, and at NVU, because of unification, we've done a lot of streamlining of our administration and shown, I think, how it can work. So right now, between the two institutions, we share one president, one provost, one dean of students, one dean of administration, one dean of admissions. So we've eliminated half of those roles. And I think at this point, I think we're pretty lean and have shown how it can be possible. So I think we need to propagate some of that across the rest of the system. And you know, there's other, I think if we look system-wide, we can probably do even better than that. So I would agree that we've been told over and over again that it's, you know, cost saving to have things centralized, and yet I can say the efficiency, the efficacy of some of the actions coming out of that have been not great. Yes, as Ben says, his hand motion says it all. It kind of tanked. So I think there's ways to do that smart, but you don't want to also take away so many folks who are doing necessary work, because a lot of our deans who are left are doing a lot of the necessary connections between institutions. They're dealing with a lot of you know, concerns from just student concerns and other things. I know that several of our deans, the dean I report to in particular, does a lot of things that I would not want to touch with the 10-foot pole in terms of dealing with some angry people sometimes. So, I mean, I don't want to like trash all our administrators either, because I think some of them are very, very hardworking, but I do agree that there's some bloat in there and that we've lost a lot of staff more through attrition. Like if somebody leaves right now, we just know that their position is not going to be filled. So they haven't done big layoffs, so it doesn't attract a lot of attention. But when somebody leaves, that position's gone. So that's what we've seen as well.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Linda. So we have one final question and a few minutes here to see if people keep their responses brief. We might hear from everyone. If we don't have to hear from everyone, but this is a question to all our panelists, one final question, and it is, what specifically should we demand from the administrations and the state to pay for the education that we deserve and need?
Can I take this one? Can I start?
Yes.
Tax the rich would be the short version. I think, yeah, just I'll throw a couple numbers out there. You know, I know that Anthony Polina proposed funding a $30 million investment in green infrastructure and green jobs through a relatively modest tax increase on the 5% of wealthiest Vermonters who saw something like upwards of a $300 million windfall from the Trump tax cuts in 2017. So like, we got to recapture some of that wealth. I think, you know, Phil Scott keeps bringing up this prison that costs $150 million, and we're going to spend like $2 or $3 billion on the prisons. Like there is money in this state. We are investing money in things that have a negative social benefit. We are failing. The wealthy are on a tax strike, and we are letting them get away with it. We are pretending that whatever conditions were in the last legislative session is like taxes cannot possibly go up from there, and it's ridiculous. So I think that is what we need to be doing. We need to be looking to raise revenue. We need to wholeheartedly reject moving money around from different sectors of the public sector, because that's what they want us to do. They want us to fight.
Thank you, Linda.
I would just agree with what Tav said. Senator Polina and Senator Pearson proposed a free tuition bill for all Vermont students for higher education for public institutions. and it would cost $32 million, and that was just taxing the most wealthy at the same rate the rest of us pay. That seems fair to me. So I do think that there is money to be had, but there has to be the courage to actually look at who has the money and tax them at a rate that's fair.
Helen?
Yeah, I just want to go, I mean, because I'm thinking in terms of this metaphor of the University of Vermont as a microcosm of US capitalism. And so the demands that we're going to make on UVM are financial transparency, open up the books, show us where the money is, include students, faculty, staff in decision making, make all funds available, cut from the top, and protect the vulnerable. And the same thing can be said for Vermont, right? It's like financial transparency, include workers in decision making. Do you think that we would have chosen to pay that all of the money for the F-35s rather than invest in Vermont state colleges? So I think that those kind of basic principles, they apply within an institution and they also apply in the state more broadly. And taxing the rich, that's freeing up the money. We know the money is there. It's restoring the tax cuts that have been given the rich for the last 3 decades.
Thank you. Ellen?
I'd like to make kind of a radical proposal. I think demands are a good idea, but I think a better idea is taking a position of something that we can accomplish ourselves without winning any concessions from the powerful. So I'd suggest considering a debt jubilee. So this is biblically, it's got like biblical history behind it. Debt is the thing that is going to destroy society. Every single student in your Vermont State College system, every single municipal, state level of government, the federal government, every corporation is crushed under the weight of debt. And every time we pay off our debt, we are putting money into the pockets of the folks that are enslaving us. The only answer to it is to organize a debt strike, essentially, declare a debt jubilee. We don't have to give, nobody has to give us permission to do us. We just have to start the movement that said this debt is illegitimate. This is what the 2008 financial crisis was about, of course, which was the mortgage collapse. And everybody on this call knows that had we not had a pandemic, what we would have had was the next stage of financial collapse on student debt. We know that. It is completely unjustified. It serves no social good. It only redistributes money from the poorest amongst us, the hardest working middle class and so on, and redistributes it into the pockets of the banks and the capital class. We have the power to do that without anybody meeting our demands. We decide. It's like a strike.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to chime in? We're 2 minutes over, but we did have a glitch. Yes, Ben?
So I just want to chime in on that point. My personal preference is probably raising tax on the very wealthy. Vermont has had a big influx of very wealthy people over the last 10 years to the extent that it has actually replaced the tax losses from a much larger number of people that have left, who probably left looking for opportunity. So those people are here. We're certainly not, even though our tax structure is moderately progressive, we're certainly not driving them out of the state with our current tax structure. And I believe that, we just look at the overall distribution of wealth. The 1% has so much, and the top 10% have so much of the wealth. It's obscene. It's just totally obscene. And that's got to be a big part of the solution. But I will say also that the key thing that I really want to get to the legislature about is they need to prioritize rural 4-year higher education in this state and local access to it. That's why the state colleges were made. And that's been forgotten. The idea that you could shut down a couple of these campuses based on some financial criteria that I think were actually bogus anyways, because they were underfunding us to begin with, and that's why our enrollment was dropping. But the idea that you should even think about closing down campuses located in the Northeast Kingdom, which desperately needs this, is just it's totally forgetting what the purpose of them is and what the mission of them is. It's a kind of weird amnesia. And I don't want to get into conspiracy theories. Maybe they wanted to shut us down because somebody wanted to build up another campus somewhere else that they favored. Regardless of whether that's kind of thing is at play, the fact that the legislature as a whole could forget what the real mission of these things are and what the real needs of rural Vermont is just blows my mind. And I'm, as I said in the VPR thing, the chancellor's proposal came out, I'm dumbfounded by it. And I'm not dumbfounded by it just because of its extremity. I'm dumbfounded by it, by the whole paradigm of thought that went into it. It was just outlandish. But maybe that's, we have an opportunity now to maybe restore that and remind them of what it is that we've got here, the gems that these colleges are.
Thank you. I believe the only person who didn't speak to this question was Kate. Did you want a chance to say anything before we wrap up? Not to put you on the spot. But.
Thank you. No, I would agree with Ben that their proposal was absolutely foolish in its delivery and in its premise, I think. But otherwise, I agree. Like, I keep hearing like, oh, if you raise taxes on the rich, they're going to leave. I'm like, why would they leave? Like, because Vermont's kind of awesome and I think they should stay. I want to stay. And so I don't know that that's necessarily a good argument against taxing our wealthier Vermonters.
So thank you all for joining us. Before we wrap up, I would just like to let people know that if you want to get involved in the DSA, there's chapters across Vermont. The chapter that I'm in, the Champlain Valley DSA, is meeting on Sunday, May 17th at 4 p.m. If I'm wrong, someone correct me in the chat quickly, but I think it's 4. And you don't have to come to all. You can join the DSA, and it looks like there's a link for people to click on, so you can learn more about the Champlain Valley DSA. You can become a member, sliding scale donation. You can give $1 a month, $5 a month. If you feel free to give $1 million a month if you can. Most people that we know can't, but it's not about the donation. It's about the engagement. It's about the connection, and it's about working together to build a multi-generational, multicultural, working class coalition to continue to fight for the public good, public assets, and to make sure that we take care of people on the planet and that we take care of everyone. And so that's my plug for people to consider becoming a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. We've had thousands of new members in the last few weeks. We're one of the largest growing organizations right now. And I think there's a reason for that. I think working class people around this country and around the world are waking up and realizing that we're continually played against each other, and that it doesn't have to be this way. And that if we stand together, like many of the panelists tonight said, we can accomplish anything we want. And so on that note, we're going to wrap it up this evening. Thank you all for joining us, all of our panelists, all the people out there. Hang in there. If you need anything, let our chapter know. We can connect you with mutual aid. It's not just about organizing politically. We're also helping each other out with the day-to-day things and making sure that we take care of each other through these tough times. So, and hopefully someday soon we can all stand 6 feet away from each other, or maybe even 4 feet. So in the meantime, let's stay connected through the technology that we have. Thank you all for making time this evening, and have a great evening.